So I was thinking back to an old video I made, and I'll link to it in the description here. But I think it's actually the most important video that I've ever made, and it is basically a list of all the major genocides, instances of colonialism, and instances of slavery throughout history that were committed by non-white or non-European regimes. And I think why this is important, I think this is the single biggest argument to deconstruct the anti-white narrative, because I think the number one thing that the anti-white narrative hinges on is the idea that white people are uniquely, like, that we have committed some sort of unique, like, atrocity that no other race has, like the idea that we are uniquely evil. And I think that is the number one idea that underpins their narrative. And it's the number one idea that we need to deconstruct. Because when you start talking about the Mongols, about the Timurids, the Ottoman Empire, the Japanese in World War II, the Hutus in Rwanda, the Arab slave trade, and all the other instances that I talk about in this video, all of a sudden this narrative becomes a lot more easy to deconstruct. And I think it's something they don't teach about in schools. Like when I was in public school or university, they never taught about it at all, about any of these atrocities committed by non-white people. It was only the atrocities of white people they talked about. And their excuse was, well, that's because we live in Canada, so we're talking about things that are relevant to us. And I'm just like, hold on, but wait a second. I thought Canada was multicultural now. So shouldn't we be talking about things that are relevant to all these new Canadians? You know, how about talking about the atrocities their ancestors committed? Like maybe the Chinese people in Markham need to hear about China's conquest of what is today Western China. Maybe they need to hear about General Tso, the guy who the General Tso's chicken is named after, and how he was responsible for the genocide against the Dzungar people. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. But yeah, I mean, there's a there's a lot of bullshit going on here. Like this idea that like apartheid in South Africa is directly relevant to us as Canadians, but yet the atrocities of the Ottoman Empire are not. Or, for instance, the idea that we have to learn all about the Germans' atrocities during World War II, but not about the atrocities committed by the Japanese. In fact, when I was in school, the Japanese were mostly painted as victims in World War II. They mostly focused on the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and also on the internment of Japanese, Canadians, and Americans, and how they were discriminated against. They didn't talk much at all about the atrocities that the Japanese committed. In fact, there was a Chinese girl in my class who seemed upset about this, and she went out of her way to do, for a class project, to do a presentation about the rape of Nanking and how horrible the Japanese were to Chinese people. And I think that's partly why she did it, is because she was pissed off about this narrative about the Japanese being the victims. And actually, I did have one Chinese university professor who focused on Japanese atrocities too. So again, I feel like when they do that though, they are, you know, they're going off the reservation. They're going off the prescribed narrative that they're supposed to follow. And it's always, you know, in the rare case where this happens, it's always somebody who's Chinese. And I think that's the thing. It's like we have this dominant narrative that our educational system is supposed to uphold, the idea of white people being solely evil, and every fucking white liberal is more than happy to uphold this narrative. But yet you'll get the occasional Chinese person who's like, wait a second, no. And I'm sure you get that in other instances of ethnic conflicts also. Like, I mean, you probably get the occasional Kurdish person who might be pissed off at the whitewashing of Turkey's historical atrocities, or the occasional Assyrian who might feel the same way. So again, like I think it's really, like, I think it's the single most important thing to deconstructing the white guilt narrative is to make people aware of the fact there have been large-scale atrocities throughout human history that have been committed by other races, and that these atrocities are not a tiny little footnote to history. They're actually a big deal, and many of them do have repercussions that last to this day. Like, I've heard a lot of people claim that Eastern Europe and many parts of Central Asia and Western Asia are still more impoverished today than they would be otherwise because of the Mongol invasions, which were like 600, 700 years ago, more or less. Okay, I might have the exact timeline wrong there, but yeah, like, I mean, it does still affect people today. Like, I mean, the Ottoman Empire's actions sure as hell still affect the Armenians today. So yeah, I mean, if you want to win the ideological war on this stuff, like, a lot of people, they focus on things that they probably shouldn't focus on, like trying to defend every overly violent police officer who murders a black person. I mean, some of these cases, like TRS was trying to defend that police officer who recently shot a black woman in her apartment, and it was completely unjustified, and they were defending it. It's like, this is stupid, okay? Like, these are losing arguments. If you want a winning argument, like what I'm talking about here, this is the winning argument. And I think it's actually the number one. It was, for me, the number one thing that got me away from white guilt was realizing that we are not unique in being colonizers, in committing genocide, in committing slavery, and doing these things on a large scale. We are not unique at all historically in doing so. It's just that maybe we were more technologically advanced. Although even then, like, the Japanese are pretty technologically advanced in World War II. I mean, the Ottoman Empire for their time were somewhat technologically advanced. So yeah, I mean, and who needs advanced technology? The Hutus proved that you can slaughter a lot of people in a really quick time span only with machetes. So there you go.